Coming up, you may or may not know that the UK Cabinet Office contains a post called the Anti-Corruption Champion. It sounds like an all-powerful hero from the pages of a Marvel comic, doesn't it? Well, in fact, nothing could be further from the truth. The current incumbent is a particularly odious individual called John David Penrose, husband of the infamous Dido Harding. And, as a member of the current rotten cabal inhabiting Westminster, it won't surprise you to hear that he acts less like an anti-corruption champion and more like a champion of corruption. Stay tuned. Before we get into it, if you enjoy these videos, please like, subscribe and get notified of new ones every Wednesday and Saturday. John Penrose, privately educated, Oxbridge, privileged background, all as you'd expect of a member of a Tory cabinet. A man who once remarked that chaotic parents are to blame for sending their children to school hungry. His role is to scrutinise and challenge the performance of government departments and agencies, so you might think he would have been extra busy during the pandemic. Especially as the government has spaffed £50 billion on track and trace and PPE procurement. I mean, the government itself has admitted that there might be some fraud in procurement during the pandemic, where usual checks and procedures have been brushed aside with the justification of emergency purchases. But we see no action at all from anti-corruption champion John Penrose, despite the fact that the Public Accounts Committee, dominated by Tories I might add, found that unimaginable resources were spent on test and trace without it making any measurable difference to the progress of the pandemic. The New York Times published an exposé back in December where it reported that about half the money spent by the government on supplies procured for the pandemic went to companies with connections to the Tory party. Tory party grandee Lord Paul Dayton was in charge of PPE procurement, and he set up a VIP lane for companies referred by government officials, ministers, MPs and peers. 1 in 10 of those companies in the VIP lane were issued with a lucrative contract, compared to the rate of 1 in 100 companies applying through other routes. This is open corruption, public money going to companies favoured by the Tories. Yet we see very little coverage of it in the media, and even less coverage of any action taken to investigate potential fraud by John Penrose. It should be his job to highlight any grift, yet he remains silent. When you think that his own wife headed up the failed track and trace system which hoovered up £37 billion of public money, you might be forgiven for suspecting a little conflict of interest there. I mean, at the risk of repeating myself, think about it. The woman who headed up a £37 billion project that the government itself has acknowledged could be prone to corruption is married to the government's anti-corruption champion. You couldn't make it up, could you? And rather than doing his job and making at least an attempt to root out corruption, John Penrose seems to be hell-bent on stopping other people from doing the very job that he's meant to be doing. Regular viewers know that I'm a supporter of the Good Law Project, a small charitable organisation who, through using the law as their weapon, seem to be the most effective opposition to this corrupt government. Penrose, of course, has the Good Law Project in his sights, recently sniping that since the start of the pandemic they have brought scores of legal cases against the government, and so far they failed to make almost all of them stand up in court. This is a complete fabrication. Last time I checked, the Good Law Project had brought 14 cases against the government since 2020, with 11 of those 14 being granted permission to be brought to court. That is a 78% success rate compared to the success rate for most judicial reviews of around 17%. Of those cases brought by the Good Law Project, only 2 have so far been ruled on, and in both cases the government lost and the Good Law Project won. Yet Penrose has claimed that judges have dismissed the Good Law Project's allegations. This again is a complete falsehood. In theory, Penrose should be on the same side as the Good Law Project. After all, both are meant to be anti-corruption. The problem for John Penrose is the Good Law Project has now been granted permission by the courts to bring a judicial review into the very decision to put Mrs. John Penrose, Dido Harding, in charge of the £37 billion test and trace disaster in the first place. No wonder Mr. Penrose is displaying naked hostility towards what he obviously considers a campaigning organisation comprised of left-wing, do-gooder activist lawyers. Penrose probably doesn't like the fact that whereas he has failed to uncover any corruption whatsoever, the Good Law Project has already exposed two highly suspicious cases involving PPE contracts worth hundreds of millions of pounds. One involving everyone's favourite minister, Cruella Patel, and another involving vast contracts awarded to a jeweller based in Florida with no prior experience of providing PPE. If the swamp is to be drained, it won't be by Conservative MP John Penrose, a member of a party where, according to a recent investigation by the superb Byline Times newspaper, a quarter of donors giving £100,000 or more have been rewarded with a title or honour. Of the Conservative Party's 20 biggest donors since 2010, 55% of them, 11 out of 20, have received an honour or a title. Now, I'm not suggesting that this is definitive proof that all those elite donors receive their honours or peerages for anything more than their services to public life, but with a significant proportion of the biggest Tory donors who receive titles directly before or immediately after donating to the party, you'd think that any anti-corruption champion worth their salt would be all over it like a rash, but not the inept, compromised, conflicted, inactive and ineffective champion of corruption, John Penrose MP.